Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's member webinar hosted by Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association. I'm Grace Atherton, WCMA's Communications Director, and I'm so glad to have you all with us today as we dive into explorations of innovations in PPE or personal protective equipment. I want to first start us off with a couple of housekeeping notes. Please make sure your mics are muted and your video is turned off so we can avoid interruptions during the webinar. You can submit questions via the chat at any time during our session, and we'll do our best to address them all during our Q&A at the end of today's webinar. A recording of this webinar, along with a list of resources, contact information for our presenters, and any questions that we aren't able to get to during the session will be shared with you via email later this week. So watch for that from me in your inbox. With that, let's take a real quick look at our agenda before we get started. So we've just done our introductions and our housekeeping notes, and we'll talk you through each speaker as they give their presentations. But first, we're going to start with an overview from WCMA on PPE requirements and some challenges that we see among dairy processors. Then we'll dive into our featured guest speakers. We have Ecolab here to discuss chemical controls and PPE. Nelson Jameson will cover eye protection, helmets, and glove offerings. Saldisha will also offer some glove options and cover that topic broadly. And Kelly Supply will talk through some glove options with us as well. Then we'll go to Q&A. As I mentioned, if you have questions that come up during our sessions, please feel free to drop them in the chat anytime, and we'll do our best to get to all of those. We also have a few questions that were submitted in advance for our presenters, so we'll have them field those at that time as well. And then we'll wrap up and get everyone out of here before 2 o'clock. So that's our agenda. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. Rebecca Sweeney is WCMA's Senior Director of Programs and Policy. And in that role, part of her work is to connect with our dairy processor members and supplier members on employee health and safety. And a big part of that, as you all know, is PPE. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Grace, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. As Grace noted, our health and safety group is a really vibrant community within WCMA's membership, meeting quarterly and discussing a variety of requirements and challenges, right? So we go over everything from new regulatory emphasis areas and the solutions that are provided in part by some of our supplier partners, right? So we're excited to give them an opportunity to share with you some of the innovations that we see in the area of personal protective equipment today. But just to lay the groundwork here, let's talk about why this topic is so important. And we'll start with a look at some of the requirements that OSHA has for dairy processors on our next slide. So this is all going to be very familiar to you if you're working in a processing facility. Your employees need to wear PPE not only for their own protection, but also for food safety. But as we're focused today on personal protection, the areas that are most important are eye and face protection, hearing protection. There's an emphasis area right now from OSHA on that. Foot and hand protection, so whether it might be boots or special shoes, gloves, we'll talk about a lot today. And in certain cases, depending on the job that you might have in a processing facility, you may need to wear a helmet. If you're operating on or nearby any sort of heavy equipment, a high visibility vest is important. Respirators can be important. And in certain jobs, cold protection is also important, right? And we put a link in there, and we will share this out after the webinar as well, a link to sort of the basics on PPE. Right now, at this very moment, we are also experiencing an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so there are some other recommendations, not requirements, that are out there from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is on the next slide. And I want to make sure that I highlight some of those things because for some of you, this may still be sort of new information. But the recommendation for any dairy processing employee that's handling raw milk, which may or may not be affected by H5N1, is to wear a respirator, right? that does come with other requirements. If you require that any of your employees wear a respirator, then you must also make sure that they're fitted and trained so that they can wear it appropriately and be safe, right? Again, this is currently a recommendation that people handling raw milk wear a respirator, but we have seen some members move in that direction already, and others are considering it. In addition to that, we know that CDC is recommending safety goggles or face shields. This is very important because thus far, humans who have been impacted by H5N1 tend to have symptoms appearing in their eyes. And we don't know yet exactly why that's the case or how these folks were first affected by H5N1, but we do know that they end up with conjunctivitis. And so one of the things that I'm hearing from safety professionals and researchers is that it's critically important that people are wearing appropriate goggles and eye covering. Additionally, they want you to be having folks wear a head covering or hair covering. Again, this is a touch point for people who may then end up touching other parts of their body and ingesting affected milk. In addition to head covering, similarly, gloves are important. Hand washing is critically important, but not a PPE item. Just associated with touch, we want to make sure people are wearing gloves and changing them frequently. And then boots or boot covers are important as well. So a lot of these things are already in line with what was required by OSHA, but now also recommended from CDC's perspective with the outbreak of high path avian influenza. More information, again, available through the link, and we'll be sharing that out. So if we know that it's important and in some cases required, why do we need to have a conversation about PPE today? Next slide. Well, excuses abound, right? We may make these materials available to employees, but we know that they're not always used consistently or appropriately, right? And what are the reasons for that, right? It may be that they're not receiving adequate supervision, right? No one's calling them on those changes. And that also points toward a safety culture in a facility that we all have to be committed from the top down, whether you're the CEO or the person who's working their first day on the packaging line, right? Everyone has to be committed to wearing that PPE and holding others accountable for wearing that PPE as well. This can be not only taught through example, but also through formal training. And of course, OSHA requires training on PPE. Other non-compliance causes certainly human error. Sometimes we just make mistakes. Sometimes we're busy. Sometimes we're short-staffed. We're moving too quickly and we make a mistake. Sometimes you've chosen the wrong PPE, or frankly, the PPE that you have is just not that great. And on that very last point is where we're going to focus today, right? We want to make sure that there are no excuses as it relates to the PPE products that you are selecting for your staff. And there are better and worse products out there, as you're going to hear from our supplier members here today. And frankly, we've come a long way even in the last year or two, certainly since the pandemic, in terms of the kinds of PPE that we can provide for our employees. So I'm excited to have them share with you some of the innovations that they're seeing in this space. And with that, I'll hand it back to Grace for introductions as we get started.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very helpful kind of stage setting there so that we're all on the same page. And as Rebecca said, we all know the importance of this critical topic and why, even if we all agree that it's important, it's still valuable to have this kind of in-depth walkthrough. So with that, I will start us off with our first presenter. Carrie Schmid is Safety, Health, and Environmental Manager for Ecolab, and she is going to cover hazardous chemical controls, PPE, and how you can keep up this first critical line of defense. So Carrie, with that, I will turn it over to you when you're ready.
Great, thank you. So thank you for the introduction, Grace. I'm glad to be here, and I only have a few moments with everyone to share. So hopefully there's a couple points in this presentation that leads you to keep making your PPE program strong. So when I initially have been thinking of PPE, what always comes to mind is the sentence of it's the last line of defense. And with that popped in my head was Wrexham Football Club. Great TV show if you have not watched it. But when you think of in order for a team to be great and have that defense even to get promoted, you have to have all culture moving in the same direction, chemistry, teamwork, learning from mistakes, removing that type of blame that's there. So when you want to tie that back to a PPE program, there's a couple things. One is how you plan and how you kind of get in that correct mindset. And the other one is how do you keep growing and your knowledge continuously, specifically around building your PPE playbook. So with the last line of defense, you need to make it as strong as possible. So you kind of, when you start looking at your PPE program, before you even dive into what that risk assessment is or what you need, how do you actually have that risk assessment? How does your team actually look and go from before they start a task? What are they even using to look at that task? What type of the assessment? Do they have the knowledge on hazard identification? What prompts are there to help them identify, communicate, even kind of check their knowledge of the controls that are even there? And most importantly, when you think about PPE, since it's that last line, the word of stop work, right? So if things are failing, that they don't continuously keep going forward, that they feel comfortable to speak up and talk about things. One of the things that we have at Ecolab, and this is actually used globally, which is pretty cool. It's one of our few tools that is done through 26 different languages all across the world, is our Be Safe. And one of the biggest tool, it is a risk assessment tool, but it's really, we take a step back, it's that mindset. So we're talking about the culture of PPE. We're talking about kind of how do you set the stage. We use what's called the Be Safe. And this is one of the things our account managers do day in and day out at all the different facilities that they visit, is to kind of keep that mindset where you stop. You're looking at what you're doing, you're looking at your risks, you're assessing that job for hazards, specifically if there's something that is a higher risk or potential where someone can have a serious injury. And then the biggest thing is familiarizing yourself, right, with that site. So since PPE is that last line of defense, where is that eye wash? Where is that safety shower? Does it work? Does it function? And then what's your plan? So getting that PPE set up, is it clean and good use, your tools before you even get started. So this is one of the tools that we have here, or we use continuously through Ecolab, is the Be Safe. Previously, there's many different things I've used, like hazardous work permits or different circle safeties, but it is a tool that we use and we are very willing to share kind of this type of mindset. Definitely to look at kind of that SDS and PPE selection. So it's really building your playbook. So how do you even start to select the correct PPE? Some of the questions to kind of think about and have ready when you even dive into selecting your correct PPE are, what are your high hazard tasks? So with that, is there specific PPE that you need? So for example, of anything around elevated work. So is it the fall protection, or is it things around scaffolding, or are you doing something with any mobile equipment? Having that SDS information as a guidance and starting point. Container size is huge. So how are you handle your chemistries, right? So is it more of a bulk tank to a tote to a drum? So what is that volume? And really taking a look at what is that severity and likelihood. So what is, when you are navigating a task with your employees and you're looking at, I'm going to select this type of PPE, what is my worst case outcome? And that likelihood really takes in how we've navigated the controls in place. So do we have a system set up and designed where we actually can remove that person from that, the likelihood that will be almost never? Or is it something we're so intimately engaging with, we really got to build that playbook around gloves or eye protection or shoes to make sure that severity does not happen? And then most importantly, having your PPE on hand. So where do your employees store PPE and have it, is it an ease of use? Because one thing I know and I've looked at, and especially in my career, is If it's not easily accessible, nor if individuals don't like to use it, they might not use it. So making sure where the PPE is for your people is just as important. So I'll spend the last few minutes I have with everybody here is kind of some of the things of our SDSs. And one of the things I wanted to call out from an Ecolab side is that we include dilution hazards. So not only on our SDSs gives as it's sold and concentrated is as dilution. So it is something to do when you're doing your PPE risk assessments, you're building that playbook, how to navigate it, and actually look also at dilution and how it's being used. So Section 2 covers our GHS classifications to really start off on giving you that high level hazard knowledge. It also includes all the different labeling to really improve that hazard identification, as well as how to communicate. When you work into Section 3, that is where you're going to find even the chemical specifics. So when you're about to go choose your PPEs and really make sure you have the right glove for breakthrough time and what's the composition of that, are you handling that chemistry as concentration or is in dilution? And then even for air monitoring. So when you're looking at respirator choice and you're going to want to make sure you have the right cartridge or style, knowing whether or not you're handling that chemistry as concentration dilution also can lend a hand to the correct PPE choice. And also then here, same exact thing, we have guidance on what are some beginning choices for your personal PPE equipment. And then also Section 9 is where you're going to find that specificness specifically around the pH, because as it changes and uses, that can you change what type of chemical PPE also you might need. And I'll just end on with this on a quote from Steve Jobs. I've had this quote for a very long time, but innovation is the ability to see a change as an opportunity and not a threat. So since PPE is that last line of defense and is kind of, we're at that last one, we've tried to engineer everything out that we can, but we know we still have that likelihood and severity that our people can get hurt. How do we keep improving? How do we keep growing from what we already have and really bring that mindset forward of growing and making your program strong? So that is what I have for you all today, and I will turn it back to Grace.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That's wonderful information. I love that easy, handy checklist format at the beginning. I love a good checklist. Next, we will turn to the wonderful partners over at Nelson Jameson. Pete Budarak, who is technical sales manager for PPE and safety with Nelson Jameson, is going to share with us some of their company's PPE innovations. Pete?
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Carrie, for all that information. Some of the products, obviously, you heard it from Rebecca and Carrie. The easier it is and the more comfortable it is, the more likely it is to be used. And that's ultimately what we need everybody to do, is use the stuff that's going to protect them. So with the products that I'm going to focus on, we have those innovations to make them both comfortable and easy to use. So first thing we'll talk about on the next slide is we will go into a new series from Honeywell, the Avatar Plus series. So it's a comprehensive family of protective eyewear. So that includes both just regular spectacles and goggles and over the glasses versions of these particular series. And it's designed to meet whatever needs that person has. So the safety spectacles and ideal for workers who just need something to go over their good seeing eyes or contacts shut. Those have the Hydro Shield with safety specs on the safety specs and also on the goggles. And those have an anti-fog and scratch resistance permanently bonded within the lens. So there's no maintenance. You don't have to wipe anything on. You don't have to spray anything off. There's no special need. It's bonded on there already. So that's going to add another 20 times as much fog-free performance as competition. And with those safety spectacles, they also have readers. So anything from 1.5 to 3 readers. The over the glasses, just a comfortable fit. They go over the glassware and over your glasses, excuse me. And then also the goggles, which also have the Hydro Shield. The design really is, The spectacles have the 9-base style lenses, so that covers all the way around the good circumference and doesn't interfere with their peripheral vision. So that helps keep dust and splash out of your eyes. Also with the spectacles, you can do interchangeable lenses. So if you want something that's UV protection or a different color to help with what you're doing, you can also do that. Number one with these is they're lightweight and they're easy to use. They have some features on them that make them a little bit more comfortable, whether it's the wraparound design that hold tight or the vents on the side to keep things cool. Also with this green tint, that's the only thing that's available in, but it's easy for supervisors to look across and see that they're being worn. So they stick out. So that's the Avatar Plus family of eyewear. And then from there, we'll move to the helmets from Hex Armor, the Ceros XP250 safety helmet. The innovation here is lots of things go into this. There's available in 7 different colors. So you can fit that into a color coding system, different areas of your plant, different people who are coming in and out, whether it's visitors or workers who are just moving from one side to the other. These have you can excuse me. Where am I? One of the benefits on these is that they have the hex event airflow system. Allows the air to move front to back so the air doesn't get stuck in your head. You don't get overheated. And those vents can be turned on, off, or minimized so that you can go with the environment that you're in. There's side and back slots for easy integration of accessories, which I'll talk about on the next page. But there's any number of different things that you can use with this particular helmet to make it more of a system than just a hard hat. And there's also a unique back of head coverage. So there's a little extension there you could see in the back that just protects the back of the head even more. So on the next slide, we'll go to some things you can add on with magnetic earmuffs and magnetic face shields are 2 of many accessories that you can add to this particular helmet. But those are magnetic. They clip right on. Easy to use, real easy to release. Other accessories that you can get with this particular helmet: chin straps, goggle clips. There's cooling helmet inserts, which work well with the vent. So if you're working out in the heat or you're working just a hot environment, using that cooling insert with the vent is going to keep you a lot more comfortable. You can also get reflective stickers, and for hygiene and for keeping that helmet in service longer, you can also get replacement parts. So that's pads, suspension systems, or adapters. So that's the Ceros helmet and accessories.
I'm going to jump in with a question because I'm
Yep.
already getting them in the chat on this one. And it's, can you tell us how the magnets work? So the concern, right, is a lot of times people are over VATS, right? And if they have a face shield or earmuffs or whatever clicked in with magnets, you've tried the product. Can you tell us about how it works in terms of can you say that you've got good assurance that they're sticking on there and they're not falling off into a vat?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not up on camera now, but it takes a little bit to get them on there, and they're real tight. They clip right in. They work real well with. I wouldn't say that you can move them back behind you to get them out of the way. But as
That's
far
great,
as
Pete. I love the show and tell too. No, it was great to be able to see that. Thank you.
So, yeah, they just clip right in on the side and work in conjunction with the magnetic face shield. So it becomes all one system. That answer the question, hopefully?
Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, we'll get more in the chat, I bet.
There we go.
But thank you. Go on, Pete.
Okay, so then I'll move on from the head down to the hands. And Ansell's Alpha Tech 58201 versatile nitrile glove. And I guess the versatility of this glove is twofold. It's got chemical protection. It's got an abrasion level 5 because of the texture of the hand. It's even got a cut level of an ACE 2. So it's not a lot of cut, but it's got some cut protection in there. There's an acrylic liner inside the glove. So it adds another layer of comfort. So it's suitable from temperatures from -41 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's July in Wisconsin, all the way up to 482 degrees Fahrenheit. And with that liner, it just, again, it adds a little bit of heat protection, and also it's another layer to protect against heat. So adds heat, protects against heat. The Ansell grip technology ensures a stronger, more secure hold in wet and oily environments. So when you're dealing with those things that maybe aren't completely dry, this is a good glove, and it's got superior chemical protection. So it's a chemical glove that with the nitrile, it's just going to be a real versatile chemical glove. With these and with the next glove, if you've got questions about what chemicals should be used or can be used, again, that's part of Ansell's program, where they'll come in and they'll line up the chemicals that work with each glove and where it fits in each system.
Pete, we've got one more that just came in the chat about these gloves in particular. Can you wash them?
You can keep them clean, and it's just a matter of they're washable. I don't know how reusable is a term that I've heard before with these, but it's just a matter of how well you keep them taken care of, I guess. And it depends on the environment also.
Of course. Great question. All right, continue, Pete. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem, no problem. And that is a 13-inch glove. So that's another thing to add there. And lastly, on my set of products is another Ansell HighFlex 11581 cut glove. It's the newest member of the Ansell Comfort Nitrile family. And when Ansell's talking about a family, that means they're gloves that are fit, feel, and function are similar. So this glove is an A6 cut level glove. So it's kind of middle of the road, maybe even a little bit higher than middle. Within that family, there's an A3, an A4, an A6, and also introduced earlier this year, an A9 cut glove. So that's the top cut glove that you can get is an A9. Ultra lightweight design. Similar gloves, they have a better cut resistance than similar gloves made of that particular PPE yarn. Thumb and crotch reinforcement, which would be ideal for sorry, I lost my place there. Okay, I'm sorry. Ideal for dry and slightly oily applications. What was I gonna say?
Well, I love that it's touchscreen compatible too, Pete. Maybe
Oh,
that was the
that was
point you wanted
where-
to make,
that's
because
where I
so many
was,
people
yeah.
are going so automated now, and that tends to be an issue where they've got a glove on, they have to take the glove off, hit the machine, put the glove back on, and then it's potentially another step where you need to sanitize or wash your hands.
Right, and where you need to take off the glove to work with technology that
Right.
we're all moving forward.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are the Ansell gloves, and again, there's 4 different gloves in that particular series, all the way from an A3 to an A9, and they all have the Vortex technology. They're not all touchscreen compatible, I don't believe, but they're all super lightweight in design, easy to use, great and sharp when you're dealing with sharp objects or you're doing maintenance on things. That's a good glove for that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Pete, so much for that overview. I'll leave this QR code up just for a few more moments as we're moving on to our next speaker, in case anyone wants to scan this. And just a reminder, we will send out contact information after our webinar as well. So if you don't catch Pete's contact info right now, don't worry, we'll get it to you. Next up, I'm happy to introduce Jim Miller. Jim is Sales and Marketing Manager for Saldesia. He just taught me how to pronounce that correctly. Thank you, Jim. And Jim is going to dive into gloves as well on their side of things. So Jim, take it away whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Grace, and good job on the pronunciation. I know it's always a different one for everyone, but you know, that's fine. So can you see my screen okay?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about disposable glove innovations. This is something that is very recently becoming more of a topic on people's minds. The manufacturer that we represent is Eagle Protect. They actually started in New Zealand, and you know, I think they have what, 6-7 million people there. So if you want to grow a glove company, you move to the United States where there's 330 million people and a lot more gloves that need to be used and handled. So they've actually only been working in the United States for about 6 or 7 years now. And COVID kind of put a damper on that because as they have a single source model, they were only supplying current customers at the time, and they were not you know, not selling gloves. They were just more maintaining. So it's really over the last 3 or 4 years that they've really gotten out into the industry. And food is definitely one of the focuses because of some of the information that I'm going to touch on. So this just came out and was published in June of 2024 in the Journal of Food Protection. It's the potential for glove risk amplification via direct physical, chemical, and microbiological contamination. This study, I forget when it was exactly performed, but it was a 5-year study. And if anyone knows about Journal of Food Protection, they have to have 2 people peer review it. And so this took about, I think, 1.5 or 2 years to actually publish. So it isn't like this is just a glove company that said, hey, we're going to test this and skew the test and, you know, put it. This has been run through the ringer. And if you, we can easily provide the link for it. I've been told if you print it out, it's running about 67 pages long. So it is an extremely in-depth study with a lot of complicated words. But there is a short version that we've broken down to make it easier to digest and consume. But basically the 3 issues that were identified as the biggest were microbial contamination, ripping, and chemicals and dermal irritation. I'm going to jump over the microbial and ripping, which is normally what we talk about. But as this is more for the employees and the worker and their protection, we're going to focus on the chemicals and dermal irritation aspect of the study. So gloves can cause skin and hand issues. There's dermal and muscle issues. So the reason there are dermal issues is one is glove raw materials. So as it says, raw, cheap materials, chemicals, things of that nature. So the example I'll use is, let's say, you know, 100 pounds of nitrile makes 100 gloves. There's companies out there that will add chemicals or powder or other additives to now make, you know, 200 gloves with only using 100 pounds of nitrile, and this other additive or powder gives them more gloves. But that actually weakens the glove, and it also provides opportunities for like unwanted chemicals and bacteria to make their ways into the glove. The manufacturing process is another way. So as gloves are made, they go through multiple dip baths, and that's simply to just continue to remove the bacteria and chemicals used in a manufacturing environment, used for manufacturing the gloves. Eagle's CEO has climbed up in some of those areas at you know, some of the manufacturers and found that they were just empty. They weren't even being dipped. Or they have dirty rinse water. So that's another way that the bacteria and chemicals can get on the gloves from the dirty vat water. they're going through. Heat and moisture, that is basically from the two that we just touched on, is now that you have bacteria and chemicals on the inside or outside of the gloves. On the inside, as you're working, your hand isn't breathing, that heat and moisture can cause some of those chemicals to leach, some of the bacteria to activate, as it gives them a perfect little, environment to flourish. So that heat and moisture is, can amplify from the above issues of the bacteria and chemicals. And then obviously latex, there's a lot of latex issues out there. And then one that I think a lot of people overlook is muscle issues, gloves that are too thick or poor glove elasticity. As Rebecca mentioned, poor PPE. There's a ton of people out there that they were probably fine with a 3 or 4 mil option, and they had a rip, and they're like, oh no, we had a rip, it got in the product, like, let's go up to the 5 mil. A 5 mil rips, then they go up to a 6 mil, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, and then there's no issues with the 6 mil, but then an employee is wearing a 6 mil glove for hours on end, and it can really tire you out. I challenge you to just go grab a few different thicknesses of gloves and just kind of sit there and do that, and you can really feel the difference with that. So a lot of times people will run up the ladder when they really don't have to, because of that poor PPE and the poor manufacturing process by some of the glove manufacturers out there. This was an interesting, as we don't really talk about this too much and focus more on the microbial contamination and the ripping and tearing, is the cost behind this. The hand is the most common site affected for OSD. Almost 2 million people suffer from it annually, and up to a $2 billion annually cost. That it just kind of blew my mind until you really see some of these numbers of the impact that can have. And again, with the MSDS, 17 days of people being out of work to let their hands recover, because you're constantly grasping, holding, carrying, turning those objects. That thick glove has a large impact on that. Just imagine it as a giant rubber band that you're having to flex. So I would much rather have a thinner, more comfortable rubber band to be flexing than a really super thick, excuse me, tough one. So very interesting of the cost of glove and hand issues. And I think this is just on the employee safety side, but I think this helps also highlight there are a lot of costs outside of gloves. Outside of just the cost of gloves, that I think a lot of people overlook, as it's one of the #1 consumables in a facility. Most times purchasing is just looking at, where can I get the best deal? Where can I get the cheapest price? There's a lot of issues outside of that with those poor gloves that end up costing you a lot more than you really realize. And you might not even be connecting the dots that it's due to the gloves. A glove getting in a product and having a hold product or recall, that's easy. But, going back to OSD or MSDS, are you having people with issues from that? So just something to consider. And how to minimize glove issues. Do not wear gloves with wet skin. Use powder-free gloves, which pretty much every food facility specifies. Wash hands and glove after, which I think a lot of people skip that. I think a lot of people take off their gloves, they go to the break room, they go to the bathroom, they go do whatever, and everyone washes their hands going onto the floor, but are they washing their hands coming off of the floor? What glove juice, I'm sure everyone has heard that, what glove juice is on their hand that maybe when they're exiting the floor, they should also consider, washing their hands or wiping their hands to remove whatever could be on that. A couple others with not using the latex gloves and choosing gloves that are manufactured for skin sensitivities. Going back to the hand and muscle issues, is that reduced thickness with better quality gloves, source high quality gloves for improved elasticity. So those are kind of some of the issues and some of the stuff that was found from that 5-year study. What Eagle does that no one else in the industry is doing is they are doing third-party testing on their gloves. And those boxes actually have a QR code on them that It's on every box. You can scan it. It shows you when and where the gloves are manufactured, when they arrived to the United States, and when they passed the third-party testing. So there's also an added element of traceability with this Delta Zero program. But they're looking at, safe ingredients, cleanliness, structural integrity, dermal compatibility. Cleanliness is they are testing the outside and the inside of the glove, because outside could contaminate your product, the inside with the bacteria and chemicals that could affect your employees. And that's where some of those dermal issues can string from. So that is the Delta Zero program. They have a 2.6 mil, a 3 mil, a 4 mil, and a 5 mil glove that are on that program. No, they could add it for the thicker gloves, but I don't see that in the near future. I think that 5 mil will probably be the thickest glove for the time being, but we've had some people replace a 6 easy. Sometimes a 7 or 8 can be replaced with a good quality 5 mil option. So some of the benefits of specifying the high quality gloves, again, this whole presentation is to kind of focus on the employee aspect. So when they are exposed to those cheap chemicals, are they having, irritants on their hands? Are they having issues? We've had 2 customers from Cheese Expo implement Eagle gloves, and they got back to, I was thinking because they were stronger or better. They said, no, we actually addressed some dermal issues where there was an employee that they thought they were allergic to nitrile, which almost no one is allergic to, but they just had such bad time with gloves and stuff like that. And they implemented the 4 mil sensitive, and that employee no longer had any issues. So we are getting more and more feedback out there of people having dermal issues with the hands from the glove. So, boosted morale, definitely. People, when they get good gloves that aren't ripping and tearing and that are more comfortable and they can flex their hands and stuff, they're happy. They're working, and that morale is boosted, and they're just going right along, and they don't have to go change gloves with rips and tears. Quality's happy because they're not finding gloves in the product. Everybody wins. And the employer benefits, I think that's some of the benefits that you have to look at outside of just what's my cost of a box of gloves. I really think you have to look at what is the benefits outside of that. Just with the reduced ripping and tearing, that can save a lot of holding product, and also that ripping and tearing can expose that glove juice, and what was inside of your glove with the heat and moisture can now get into the product. Or on your product, whatever you might be handling and making. So there's a lot of benefits out there. A lot of people overlook it. I don't know if anyone out there is testing their gloves, but I'd recommend doing some swabs and seeing if you find anything. We've had people come back and say, oh yeah, we found something. Certainly not trying to say all glove manufacturers are bad and all gloves are bad, but there are definitely the manufacturers out there that are cutting corners and, providing, like Rebecca said, that poor PPE. There are better options out there, and I recommend, taking a look at it and doing so. This was actually from Eagle. I started itching my hands when they said that, but it's itching to ask a question. It just makes you think about it, because a lot of people, it's just not something that you're always, kind of thinking about. But we have a really nice glove best practices guide we can offer. Again, this isn't just for Eagle gloves. This is for, any glove, of how you can look at it and evaluate. And then we're always happy to provide samples and let you try out the different mill thicknesses, because the thinner mill thicknesses really surprise people. So it's definitely a seeing is believing aspect with that.
That's great, Jim. Thank you so much for all that information. So many eye-opening costs that I think you're right. A lot of people don't necessarily think regularly about just how much of a cost is associated with those skin issues, muscular issues that can arise from using the wrong type of glove. Next up, I'm excited to turn things over to Brandon Ewing. He is Strategic Business Manager for Kelly Supply. And Brandon is also going to take us further down the deep dive of the world of gloves in PPE innovations. So Brandon, I'll turn things over to you.
It's a deep dive for sure. Brandon Ewing, I've been with Kelly Supply for roughly 6 years, served a multitude of roles from territory sales to strategic business management, which is my current role. But previously I'd worked with in the safety supply as the safety supplies product manager for the last 4 years until recently. We brought in Dawn Shaner, who will head the category moving forward. So guys, this is my last hurrah as product manager of safety supplies. Take it easy on me, but moving forward, the category is in good hands. Safety pun intended.
It takes too long to unmute so you can hear the giggles, Brandon.
Yeah,
You
well,
did get a reaction over here, okay?
that is me. So just to start with purpose, process, payoff. Purpose, briefly explain some of the newer technologies that we see in the market and that we work with in the market. Process, discussion will be centered around two specific product lines, Showa-Best's EBT products and Ansel's ErgoForm technology. And then the payoff, to educate and guide decision makers on options that best suits each individual company. Now, to add a little context before I kind of get into this next slide, in the safety realm, specifically when dealing with hand protection, there are thousands of options to choose from. Differentiators include materials, manufacturers, colors, thicknesses, textures, lengths, and so on. What works for some is not going to necessarily work for all. So testing and trialing is a necessity to ensure that employees are comfortable and protected in a workplace while adhering to each individual company's specific policies and procedures. With sustainability efforts continuing to be a part of our everyday life, PPE and disposable gloves may soon be a point of contention. Right now, single-use gloves are estimated to be in the 100 to 200 billion of domestic use annually, with the majority ending up in trash and landfills. So what is EBT or EcoBest technology? Showa started designing this process over 12 years ago. Organic materials and fibers are added into the products during the manufacturing process that will aid in biodegradation in landfills. Specifically, microbes are attracted to these additives as a nutrient source and will consume, metabolize, and break down product into organic soils, methane, and carbon dioxide. In perfect environments, products may break down in roughly 1 to 5 years. So some may ask, will these products break down and biodegrade prior to or during use? If product is stored correctly, they have the same shelf lives as non-EBT products. These EcoBest products need the necessary environment microbes to eat the organics within the gloves. So as all will run as planned until the gloves and products hit those biologically active landfills. These products and Showa's processes are all Green Circle certified. You can see that there at the top. Green Circle certification is a third-party audit to ensure that companies' compliance with eco-friendly products, operations, and multi-attribute claims that have been made are all legitimate. So some may also ask, what other options are out there as sustainability becomes more of a necessity? Folks like TerraCycle, you can hire out a recycling company to do what they do, and they do a very good job, but it can be very costly and an imperfect solution. Imperfect because where cleanliness of products and proper disposal plays a part in what actually gets repurposed. Like with other disposable PPE, the EBT brand has options within multiple categories. The single-use gloves that are under their line have 10 different options ranging in color from black, blue, and green, thicknesses from 2.5 mil to 8 mil, cuff length from a standard 9.5 inch length to an 11-inch extended cuff length. Their chemical protection has 5 different type A chemical protective gloves, both in supported, lined, and unsupported. And a multi-purpose glove, which was recently added, typically you'll see used in maintenance and mechanical. Options within the EBT offerings can be used in 30 different manufacturing categories. So really in summary of this slide, if sustainability has been a focus, Showa has options and we can help find a fit. Are we doing our part? Now I would briefly like to talk through the Ansel Ergoform technology. While PPE has historically been designed for either product protective or personal protective, it hasn't always been manufactured with the user as the sole focus. Ergoform tech was developed and designed with repetitive manual tasks as in labor-intensive activities in mind. Repetitive tasks and the PPE being selected for said jobs can lead to hand and arm fatigue, which subsequently puts stress on other parts of the body. For example, gloves that restrict movement of hand or fingers require the wearer to exert more muscle effort to perform similar tasks. This leads to an increased risk of strain, which can lead to hand fatigue or persistent and painful conditions such as carpal tunnel. Ansel has a full catalog of Ergoform design products that were built specifically for employee comfort and protection. Specifically in talking with Ergoform hand protection, operations managers should review and specify gloves designed for the following: task, hazards, and functions being performed. This means considering multiple factors, including fit. As Jim had mentioned, do the gloves fit right? Too small, it restricts movement. Too big, you're going to lose dexterity and feel. Too big can also be a safety concern for the wearer and a product contact concern for the employer. Grip. Grip is going to play a major role in the amount of muscle effort required to safely handle, hold, or manipulate objects. Construction. The materials that the product is constructed of will dictate wearability. And then application specific. Differing conditions will present differing needs for the wearer. With the factors mentioned previously, there are options available to help aid in wearer comfort and safety. And then just to summarize slide 7 here, how will this benefit? New glove design will both protect the employee while providing much needed support for the musculoskeletal health. So in conclusion, employee safety is at the forefront of every employer. Single-use gloves, while many options out there, are not created equally. When choosing what glove is right for you, application, product construction, fit, grip, and sustainability should all be taken into consideration with the employee's safety in mind. Thank you again for the opportunity, Grace. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Brandon. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And we appreciate all of our presenters' time. Now we will dive into questions and answers. So if you have any that have come up over the course of our presentations, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We do also have a few that were submitted ahead of time that we're going to jump through quickly here to make sure that we get everyone out on time. So our first question here. We continue to be frustrated by booties that are just not anti-slip enough for wet floors. I'm sure we've all been in a cheese plant or two. Those floors can get really slippery. Do you see any advancements on the horizon there or have any recommendations? I'll leave the floor open here for Rebecca or any of our presenters from our member companies that may have insight on this. Anyone want to chime in?
So hearing nothing from Jim, go for it.
So I think we did a boot presentation a few weeks or
Sure did. A couple months ago, right?
Probably
Jim?
a couple months ago now. Time flies. So I know this is always tough because the booties I would say are probably for visitors or you're using them for the employees because you probably don't have space for like a what's it called? I'm forgetting the word, where you have where the employees have their own boots. They don't take them home. Right. They leave them in their lockers or get cleaned and stuff like that. There's a lot of companies that have issues, but my 2 cents is if you can implement a boot program and give everyone their own pair of boots, I highly recommend it. We have a pair of boots that have been implemented by say 5 or 6 cheese manufacturers since the Cheese Expo. So in a short amount of time where they tested them and they're like, the anti-slip on these is fantastic. We're not having issues. It's a vulcanized rubber sole, so it has the very high slip properties. And then it's also high wearing. So we want to see manufacturing facilities getting about a year out of that sole. But so that would be my recommendation is there's new boot technology out there with better anti-slip and better newer materials that I would recommend taking a look at. But I don't have any recommendations on new booties.
But Jim, you raise a good point, right? We have had a lot of, so one of the things that we can do after this program is resend out a link to that webinar that we did specifically on prevention of slips, trips, and falls, which covered in quite great detail booties and boots, right? But since that time and since Cheese Expo, we really have seen a lot of our members get into a boot program. And they've done some cost benefit analysis on this as well. And, you know, having to replace those booties once, twice, 3 times a day versus having boots that are dedicated and clean. Most folks are not complaining about that investment in boots that are going to last an employee a whole year. The issue is always turnover in plants, but that's something that our PPE suppliers cannot help us with yet.
You
So
can
I
also
think
what's it called? To look at that, you can get a lesser expensive pair of boots. That we have a facility doing that. You know, they're going to come up with a threshold of you have to be here for 30, 90 days before you get the nice Cadillac boot. So that we've seen some people do that.
that's great insight, Jim. Thank you so much. So we'll send out some additional resources on this topic after the fact, but worth looking at a boot program.
All right. Our next question on deck here, equipment is great, but people have to use it properly. And while we train our employees, we're not sure that the messages are always being received. Do any of you do on-site training with PPE or recommend trainings with outside organizations? Any thoughts here from our presenters?
So I'd say that one of the things that we like to do is travel with manufacturer reps who are always able to come out, and we can set up trainings and showings at your location. We are also working with a consultative training, Endpoint Solutions. They do some of the bigger trainings and they're nationwide. So we work real closely with them sometimes. So depending on what level of training is needed, yeah, I'd say we're able to cover those needs.
Any good supplier is going to let you try on things and point out errors in use, and many of them are willing to do explanations to your employees as well. In addition to that, I guess I'll put in a plug for basic safety training for dairy processors, which is a new program offered by Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association. I believe we have 3 more offerings of that training coming up this fall, and that absolutely covers proper use of PPE, along with all of the emphasis areas for those of you in OSHA Region 5, that regional emphasis program on food processing safety. We're hitting all of those points. Obviously, they're applicable beyond Region 5 as well. So if you need more information about that, go to wischeesemakers.org.
A great plug, Rebecca. Thank you. Next question we have that was submitted earlier. PPE is recommended, for dairy processing workers handling raw milk. Rebecca mentioned this when she talked about OSHA regulations and CDC recommendations surrounding H5N1. Are any of you able to offer advice on what PPE offers the best protection?
I'll jump in because this is certainly an evolving situation. It's dynamic, and we're still learning more and more about H5N1 every day. So one of the things that folks should consider is staying abreast of the latest information, which we'll have on our website and in our newsletters every week. What I keep hearing from federal partners and state partners in terms of occupational safety is that any PPE is better than no PPE, right? So going back to that slide at the beginning, checking those boxes, eye protection, glove protection, head coverings, respirator, or any face mask. Again, from our partners at the Department of Health Services here in Wisconsin, they recognize that folks aren't necessarily going to want to put on a respirator, but any face mask is better than no face mask. So we just encourage you to be open to considering these things, to put that safety first as we continue to respond to a dynamic situation. But no brands. We're not going to plug any brands specifically for protection against
Brand
H5N1. I don't think it's all been tested yet at this point.
Mhm.
I also posted on LinkedIn a few weeks ago a blog post from Nelson Jameson's blog, but if you find that, or I can resend it out, I suppose. There's a whole list of, I mean, it goes everything: gloves, protective clothing, footwear, that all is related to that H5N1.
That's great. Yeah, Pete, if you can send me that link, I'll make sure to include that in our follow-up as well.
Will do.
All right. Our last question that we've got that also came up in the chat here as well. We're emphasizing eye protection and masks more than we normally would because of those CDC PPE recommendations. That brings us back to a COVID era issue: goggles and glasses fogging up. Has anyone figured out a solution to this issue?
Well, Pete had some recommendations.
Yeah, Pete, you talked a lot about goggles and glasses. I see Brandon's coming back on camera as well.
Yeah, and the product that I went over from the product I went over earlier, the Hydro Shield anti-fogging coating, is embedded in the glasses, and it's also an anti-scratch. So it's both a fog protection and a scratch protection, and that's already in the glasses and the goggles.
Yeah,
Brandon, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Pete did a really good job of explaining some of those options in his slide deck there. But for those that are using just general, safety wear, safety glasses, there are wipes and sprays that you can get that help provide an extra level of coating to some of the products that are currently being used. Not great, but adds a little bit more of a protection to help solve that problem.
All right. I'm going to do one last thank you here to all of our presenters. We very much appreciate their time and their expertise today. I also want to remind everyone listening in that we will send out a recording of this webinar to you, along with slides, contact information, and a list of links and resources. So watch for that in your email inbox. Before we close up, real quickly, I want to do a plug for WCMA's Health and Safety Group. I'm going to invite Rebecca to jump in here if she has additional things to add, but this is a group that meets quarterly. It's always hybrid, open to all. As you can see, it's low cost to participate, and it facilitates 2 training programs, one of which Rebecca talked about earlier, and another Train the Safety Trainer you'll see there is also new. Rebecca, anything you want to add about the Health and Safety Group? I know it's
You covered it. You covered it, Grace. You hit everything on the slide there. I see a lot of my friends from our Health and Safety Group in our participant list right now. And we just want to thank you for your participation. You've made that an incredibly vibrant group that gets a lot of things done. We've launched a lot of new programs. Also want to thank our supplier partners who've been sponsoring some of our training programs, including Nelson Jameson, that's joining us today.
Wonderful. And the last thing that I'll leave you all with is to watch for more programming from WCMA related to H5N1. We will be shortly announcing some new programming in the coming weeks to cover the topics you see here: biosecurity planning, employee safety practices, and food safety research and regulation, all relative to H5N1, the current outbreak in the US among dairy herds. So keep an eye out for that. If you are not receiving our communications, just reach out and let us know anytime. We're happy to get you on those lists and make sure that you're up to date on all the offerings we have to share. With that, thank you all very much for your time and for listening and joining us today. Watch for that follow-up email in your inbox, and we hope you'll join us again in the future. Have a great afternoon.